Hi, Randy.
Good morning, Melanie. How are you today?
Yes, I'm grand. You're looking very clerical today.
Well, that's right. That's right. Always out doing the work of the Lord.
Well, it's not just a clerical shirt, it's a black clerical shirt. Not often we see you in one of them.
No, I
And all
know.
the rest dirty.
I'm going native.
I should just thought you've just not done your ironing.
Well, maybe that as well. Would you like me to go and change my shirt? Would you like me in a different shirt?
No, whatever you feel comfortable in, I'm sure is absolutely fine.
Thank you
Notice
very
you've
much.
changed your background as well there.
I know. I know. I thought we'd go on holidays today.
Where is it?
That is the view from Penryn Bay. And just behind where that photo's taken is where you see all the seals go for nesting. So
Nice.
every Sunday morning, I'm there at 7 o'clock, well, not every Sunday morning at the moment, praying with the seals. So that was
Very
probably
nice.
taken one Sunday morning at about 7 a.m.
Lovely. Sounds peaceful.
Have you had a busy day so far?
Yeah, it's been great. But I was just thinking it looks peaceful in contrast to our reading today.
Well, exactly. Exactly.
Well,
You
that's segue.
spotted it. You spotted it. There was a reason, a theological reason.
Uh-huh.
Yes. On today's reading.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite miracles of Jesus, actually. This one, the calming of the storm.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. It seems to come up quite often, doesn't it? Or maybe it's Mark's account we're more familiar with.
I think I'm probably more familiar with Mark's account because I did Christianity Explored quite a lot,
Yeah.
and of course it features in that, but it is in the three synoptics, isn't
Hmm.
it? The calming of the storm.
And if you read the technical commentators, they argue over where Luke's cribbed it from. They wonder whether Luke's cribbed it from Matthew, or some of the commentators argue that he hasn't cribbed it. But there you go. Whether he cribbed it
It
or not doesn't matter.
doesn't really matter. Well, he did a Luke did a scholarly investigation, didn't he? Finding the sources and everything.
That's
So
right.
he could have got it from the same place the others did, or he could have had it from another one of the disciples, or you know,
And this is the
wherever.
first of a run of three miracles of Jesus that we get in this chapter, isn't it?
Well, I think it's four, isn't it?
Is it four? Which is the fourth
Four,
one?
because we've got this one, then we've got the
Yeah,
Gerasene demoniac,
yeah,
then we've got the dead girl, and we've
yeah,
got the woman with the issue of blood.
yeah, yeah. The lectionary breaks it into three, doesn't it? I think.
I haven't looked up what's coming next. Is that what happens?
I
Well,
think
you
so.
you can't really split the girl and the woman, can you?
No.
Because they're
So
interwoven.
maybe that's why some commentators treat it as three miracles.
But it
But
is
hey
actually
ho.
four.
Yeah, but that's why the commentators treat it as three, because you can't split them.
Well, they can't
But hey
count
ho.
though, then, can they?
Well, maybe not. Maybe not. But I'm not sure that makes much difference to today.
Absolutely not.
Other than it shows at this point a major shift in Luke's emphasis, doesn't it? So whereas up to this point the emphasis has been on the words of Jesus, we now see a shift to the actions of Jesus, showing the power of Jesus.
Mm. And this particular power seen over nature. We already got a glimpse of it, didn't we, with the fishermen, with the
Mm.
miraculous catch of fish. That was a nature miracle,
Hmm.
and this one is just a massive miracle of nature, isn't it?
Do you know some of the commentators argue or discuss whether this miracle took place um, straight after that incident? Um, but there's no indication from Luke that it does. It could be a total separate occurrence.
I'm not
So
sure
the
that
youth.
matters hugely, does it?
Well, I think it has to do. All those commentators who like to argue that it does would argue that it just sort of geographical and continuity. But Luke makes the point right at the very beginning of one day. So this is something separate from what you were just talking about, the preaching from the boat.
Hmm. But nevertheless, it seems like it's been a busy old day. I expect every day was busy for Jesus because he asks the disciples to go over to the other side of the lake, and they get in
Hmm.
the boat, and he falls asleep.
Mm. But something you're keen on doing before we go running too far ahead, on verse 2, one day Jesus said to his disciples, as you said, Jesus asked them, let us go over. It's Jesus here who takes the initiative. So, why did they end up in a storm? Jesus' divinity, he knows what's going to happen. So, did Jesus lead the disciples into the crisis? Let us go over to the other side of the lake. It's Jesus takes the initiative here. Um, Jesus is the one who comes and tells them what to do, which I find kind of interesting from a sort of more um, pastoral context, that Jesus here leads the disciples into a crisis to prove a point or several points, as we'll discover, which makes you wonder about life.
It's often through the crises that we draw closer to God, isn't it? Because we see his power at work.
Yeah.
Interestingly, I was when I was preparing my sermon for last Sunday, I'm using the account of a North Korea who runs away from North Korea, gets converted to Christianity, and then God calls him back again to North Korea to go and share the good news, which he does. And there's a whole family that gets converted because of his ministry. And he's chosen a different, or he's submitted to Jesus to take the more difficult route. But he actually says something really pertinent about the purpose of suffering and the hardship. If I can find it, I'll tell you. He says, "If I had only walked an easy path, I don't think I'll believe in God so much. Suffering is beneficial. This is why I'm believing in God. In those sufferings and those difficult times, in those trials, I experience how God answers my prayers. This is how I now believe that God is a living God. I want to
Mm,
follow him to the end."
mm, mm. Just as another aside, well, it's not an aside, it follows on from what you've been saying. Does JC Ryle have anything to say on that?
Well, actually, I've got a brilliant JC Ryle quote, but I'm going to do it further on because it's to do with the help in trouble and calming the
Right,
waves.
right,
But he's
right.
got a fantastic quotation.
I'm
It's
sure.
brilliant.
Yeah, yeah, I'm sure. No, I was just
We'll come
wondering
on to that
whether
in due course, I think.
whether Ryle picks up that point about Jesus taking the initiative and
No,
his relationship to suffering.
he majors more on the humanity of Jesus,
Right.
in that he needs to sleep, and the
Yeah.
trust that Jesus has in his heavenly Father, that he
Mhm.
can sleep through the storm.
Right. Right.
So that's more the point that he makes, and it's an important point, isn't it? In this passage, you've got the humanity of Jesus, and you've got the divinity of Jesus.
Hmm.
That sort of mystery of the incarnation sort of played out in this passage,
Hmm.
because he's not some sort of superhuman who doesn't need to sleep. He
Yeah.
needs to take time away, he needs to sleep and to rest, because actually doing God's work is tiring. And I think it's
Yeah.
good to remember that, actually, because I think sometimes as clergy in particular, we want to serve God, we want to do our best. Sometimes we think that taking some time out to rest is wrong somehow, that we're letting God down if we're stopping and resting, that it's indulgent. But Jesus stopped and rested. Jesus
That's right.
had a nap,
Yeah. An afternoon snooze.
afternoon nap.
Yeah.
Because it's while he's having his nap that this furious squall comes down. And I think the word you're about to say, that the English doesn't really grasp the badness of this storm.
Well, actually, I still think we need to take a step back. Still on verse 22. How, so Jesus says, let us go over to the other side of the lake. What do the disciples do? They got into the boat and set out. So whereas when Jesus preaches and the fishing incident, Peter objects and comes up with his loads of excuses why we can't do Jesus's will, maybe by now Peter has learned to follow Jesus, however ridiculous it sounds. So they get into the boat and set out.
I don't think he had a whole string of excuses. He just said, like, we've been fishing all night, we haven't caught anything. But if you say so, we'll go. So he, I won't call it a string of excuses. He does actually go.
Well, when we were talking about it, we came up with 4 or 5 different implications of that.
I still think
Whereas
you're over
this
egging it
time,
a bit.
well, we over-egged it then 2 or 3 weeks ago.
I don't think we did.
Well, there we are. But anyway, they get in the boat, they set out, they do it. Jesus takes the initiative, their response, this time, do it. They've learned.
Okay, fine. But he goes to sleep. Then there's a squall,
Yeah,
and it's the word for whirlwind, isn't it?
yeah, yeah.
This is no ordinary bit of blowy weather, is it?
No. And what makes it even more incredible is, the disciples are professional fishermen. They know, they know the weather. They're going to know the conditions on the lake, and yet they still go. And then yet they are still um frightened, scared by it, even though these guys are professional fishermen. They would have known or should have known how to handle those sorts of conditions.
Well, but maybe that shows you how bad it is because
Yeah.
professional fishermen do know how to handle the conditions. It's only when something unexpectedly bad happens that they struggle. You might know one of my favourite programmes is Deadliest Catch, and it follows crab fishermen on the Bering Sea. And you see them going out in all sorts of weather, and there's waves that are massive, and the boat's doing this. But in the wheelhouse, they're just like, well, we just got to get on with fishing. We've seen it before, just got to make sure I steer the boat well, keep an eye on the guys, make sure I give them a warning when a big wave comes so they don't get knocked overboard. But they're not afraid. Yet, just occasionally, there'll be a bit of weather or a rogue wave that does make them afraid because they know it can sink the ship. And I think that's the territory we're in here is they'll have seen storms, but this
Mhm.
storm is one which could sink them. And we're told in the text there they were in great
Yeah.
danger. So the danger is real.
Yeah. So you watched Deadliest Catch,
Good.
righto. And what did the disciples do? They went and woke Jesus, or they went and woke him up. So at the beginning, you get Jesus commanding them to get into the boat, let us go over to the other side of the lake. Um, this situation arises, which is maybe beyond their expertise or their experience or their knowledge, as you've said. And what's their response? Let's go and wait Jesus. So we've learned that we do what Jesus tells us to do from the preaching and the fishing. And what do? Go and wake
Where have you gone?
Jesus.
You keep disappearing.
Oh, it's because I want to be by the seaside.
Sorry, I spoiled your flow there, but we just completely lost you. But going back to the waking Jesus, I think that can be read either way, you see. Yeah, when we're in trouble, it's good to go to Jesus. And they've learned that they can go to Jesus. Yeah, that's a great thing. But the flip side of that is actually if they trusted Jesus and if they really understood who he is, then they should have known that they would have been safe with him. But
Yeah,
they don't
which
see that. They just see the danger.
yeah, which if you know your Old Testament, which makes your point even more um relevant, they would know from the Psalms about God being in control of the seas, as you say, the divinity control of the seas.
Yeah, so they haven't quite got there with Jesus, and of course we know that by their response at the end that they still haven't completely grasped who Jesus
Hmm.
is. Otherwise, they wouldn't have needed to go to him because they would have trusted him in the danger. Um, but he gets
Yeah,
up, doesn't he?
yeah. And with a word, calms the storm or tells the
Yeah,
storm to stop.
yeah, and I absolutely love that. I just love the thought of him standing there and the storm coming to a complete stop. Because of course storms don't do that, do they? You can't say, oh, this was a natural thing, because even if the wind dies down, the waves are still choppy for ages.
Mm,
Here, he's stilled both with a word, and everything is absolutely calm.
yeah.
And this is where I've got a great quote from J.C. Ryle about the power of Jesus for
Can
his
I,
people.
just in case Mr. Ryle said, or Bishop Ryle said it, um, if this doesn't, what I love is the contrast um, between verse 25 and with the disciples. So who's surprised? I just wondered with verse 25 whether Jesus is surprised. When Jesus says, "Where is your faith?" Is he surprised? Question mark. I just wondered, but there we are.
I think you're
So,
taking it down a different route for the moment. I thought we were still talking about his power in the storm because you've moved it
well,
on to his response afterwards. So should we have JC Ryle?
if JC Ryle doesn't touch on that, you have Mr. Ryle, Bishop Ryle.
Let's stick with the point we're on, and then we can go on to the next point. He says, "It is a blessed and comfortable thought that all this almighty power of our Lord Jesus Christ is engaged on behalf of his believing people. He has undertaken to save every one of them to the uttermost. He is mighty to save. The trials of his people are often many and great. The devil never ceases to make war against them. The rulers of this world frequently persecute them. The very heads of the church, who ought to be tender shepherds, are often bitterly opposed to the truth as it is in Jesus. Yet, notwithstanding all this, Christ's people shall never be entirely forsaken. Though sorely harassed, they shall not be destroyed. Though cast down, they shall not be cast away. At the darkest time, let true Christians rest in the thought that greater is he who is for them than all they that be against them. The winds and waves of political and ecclesiastical trouble may beat fiercely over them, and all hope may seem to be taken away. But still, let them not despair. There is one living for them in heaven who can make these winds and waves to cease in a moment. The true church, of which Christ is the head, shall never perish. Its glorious head is almighty and lives forevermore, and his believing members shall all live also and reach home safe at last. You don't look too impressed. I think that's a word for our time.
It's very good, very relevant.
Well, I think it's hugely relevant. The winds and waves of political and ecclesiastical trouble may beat fiercely over them, and all hope may seem taken away, but let them not despair.
Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah. Jesus knows, Jesus has power, Jesus can still the waves and the winds in a nanosecond if he so chooses.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, encouraging. Right, do you want to go on to the next bit then?
If I'm allowed to.
You were skipping it on too fast.
Righto. Okay.
Would you have
Okay.
missed that quote? Would you have wanted to miss that quote?
No, it was an excellent quote, Melanie.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
Or make your point then.
Yeah. Sorry,
Make your point then.
I can't remember what. Yeah. 25 is Jesus surprised.
I don't
You
think
know,
he's surprised. Anything can surprise Jesus, can it? But I think he's a bit dismayed.
where is your faith? You know, he knows where they're at. They should have learned by now to trust him. Um, and I wonder whether there's also, if he's taken by surprise, whether there's a contrast with verse 23, the disciples' surprise. So if you like, the disciples are surprised early on, the point you were making about their experience. And now Jesus is surprised by the disciples' lack of faith or um, lack of depth of faith.
Yeah, I'm not sure he's surprised, like I said, but I think he's disappointed in it. JC Rail's got a one-line quote. Where was the benefit of trusting if they were to trust their master in sunshine only and not in
Indeed,
storms?
indeed, indeed. But you know, the disciples do have faith, but it's a weak faith. So where is your faith? It assumes they have faith, um, but it's a weak faith
Well, in Mark's
at this
gospel,
point.
he says, "Oh, you have little faith," doesn't he? But they
Yeah,
have faith. It doesn't matter if your
yeah,
faith's a little faith.
yeah,
It's as long as that faith is in Jesus. That's what's important, isn't it? Of course, they ask the question, "Who is this?" Now they
yeah,
should have known the answer to that question, shouldn't they? You mentioned the Psalms earlier on.
yeah. They should have. Yeah, pops up in Psalm 89, 93, 105, and 107, and Psalm 65, which we'll come on to in a moment.
Well, you've got other psalms as well, of course. But I love Psalm 107 because I love the way it parallels
Hmm.
this miracle. I mean, they bring it out. You do the Christianity Explored. It's one of the exercises you get people to do is you compare the two passages, and they're so similar, except in the response of the sailors. Because in the psalm they rejoice because God has saved them.
Yeah,
In the disciples' case, they're afraid, aren't
yeah,
they?
yeah.
So you have to ask the question why.
So the disciples ask the question, who is this? So they ask the right question, don't they? They're reflecting on it in fear and amazement. Who is this? The right question to ask, but don't know the answer or don't expound the answer at this point.
Or maybe it's because the answer's too big for them to kind of compute at that moment in time. They know the only one is who can still the storm is the Lord.
Hmm.
But could the Lord also be this rabbi they're following, their teacher? You know,
Yeah,
and that's quite a big step to make, I think, don't you? Just
yeah,
because it's like so big.
yeah. Is this really the guy who's the Messiah? Could it really be him?
Yeah.
Yeah,
And of course, we'll get more evidence for it as we go through the rest of chapter 8, as you mentioned earlier. You know, we'll see his power over evil spirits. We'll see his power over death, and we'll see his power to heal and to deal with uncleanliness as well.
yeah. So do we panic in a crisis? Where do we go in a crisis? Yeah,
Yeah. Do we trust Jesus to sort out the winds and the waves and the storms of our own day?
and is it that we like to be in control, so we're going to sort it out? We don't need you, Jesus, or maybe we do need you, Jesus, but first of all, we're going to try it through our own strength. And when we discover we're not in control or we can't sort it, it leads to all sorts of issues and problems for us. But what I was going to sidetrack into is Psalm 65, which is the psalm appointed for the day. And just what a wonderful psalm that is. Um, you know, it obviously the lectionary writers, one would guess, have picked it, used it because of verse 7. telling the hearers who God is, what he does, still the roaring of the seas, the roaring of the waves, and then the turmoil of the nations. So God is a God of peace. But it's just how, you read, it's a harvest hymn, and it would have been used at the Feast of Tabernacles. And you read verses 1 to 4, and well, for the whole thing, and just what an amazing God he is, that he's a God of grace, a God of might, and then finally a God of plenty. Such a wonderful. And so, what's our response? Verse 13, to shout and sing for joy, as you said earlier. Um, what a wonderful, wonderful psalm. God is just so gracious to us and powerful in bringing about his purposes.
I like the point you made about the calm because Bock says something about that. He says Jesus' authority means he has the power to deliver those who depend on him. Calm waves can come only from the one with the power to restore order.
Yeah, yeah. And what I love about the psalm as well is it talks about the turmoil of the nations. And, we live in our time watching the news today and some of the international politics that are going on, and you can't help but be a little bit nervous, wondering where it's all going to end up. Um, but who, verse 7, is the source of peace and worldly peace, as well as, we normally think of peace in our hearts, but um, the peace that God brings in our international politics. But also listen to the poetry of verse 8 in that psalm. The whole earth is filled with awe at your wonders. Where morning dawns, where evening fades, you call forth songs of joy, our our praise that we should be offering to him. Isn't it beautiful words?
Mm. Yeah, great. What's a great way to finish then, isn't it?
I'm glad you agree.
I'll enjoy
Have a good
preaching on it.
have a good rest of the day, Melanie.
And you.
Take care.